Hi, Professor Tad. We are very pleased to have you. You have studied Tao Te Ching for over 3 decades. So what is Tao in your eyes?
My research method is to look at this classic of China, ancient China, and look at how it's been interpreted throughout Chinese history, and then also as it is spread around the world, to look at the different ways translators have tried to understand the meaning and then express that understanding in different languages. And so there's a question of how do you translate Tao into English? There are different choices. But all of these choices include an interpretation. So the most common way to translate Tao in English is the way. The way. The way of living, the way of doing things, the way of the universe, the way to happiness, right? All different kinds of ways. So that's one understanding. There's a professor, Brooks Saporin at the University of Chicago. He translates it as course, like the course of a river. So Tao flows, right? This Tao, this order, this origin of the universe, it flows. And so we are on this course and we go along. It's not a path, because that's something you walk on. A course is something you flow through, right? So that's a different understanding of Tao. Some people say, oh, you can't translate Tao, it's a special word. There's actually a long debate about whether Tao is something that sort of transcends the world or is something that is everywhere in the world and is not at all separate or distant from us. And this debate has existed in the Chinese tradition and continues outside of China among different translators and interpreters.
Tao Te Ching is roughly 2,500 years old. Is it still relevant today?
With the phenomenon of the Tao Te Ching in the world, is clearly people are getting something of value from it. Otherwise, they wouldn't keep reading this weird old Chinese book. One of the things that makes a book a classic is that it is continually meaningful, right? You take it out of its original context, ancient China, 2,500 years ago, it still inspires people somehow. And of course, the way that it inspires them varies. Modernization and some of the downsides of modernization or modern life, where things have sped up a lot, where we're more disconnected from the natural world. Tao Te Ching says the 5 colors will make our eyes blind. The 5 sounds will make our ears deaf. It's criticizing in some way that overstimulation of our sensory system can be unhealthy, right? And we live in an overstimulated world. And so these kinds of issues, when people read the Tao Te Ching, they reflect and say, oh, maybe we should try to have more engagement with the natural world. So some people, read the Tao Te Ching and that inspires them. Or they read it and they see ideas like the weak overcomes the strong. And they think, oh, everyone is saying, drive forward, get ahead, be competitive, be aggressive. The Tao Te Ching says, do not be competitive. But if we're not competitive, then what will happen, right? So then you start to have this reflection on how do we live our lives, what is important, how do we navigate through a complex world, but also maintain a kind of inner stillness or connection to something greater than ourselves, right? A lot of these different kinds of questions, I think, are still quite relevant to lots of people in the world.
Taoism advocates ideas like governing through non-action and living in harmony with nature. Facing challenges like climate change and growing geopolitical tensions, how do you think Taoism can inspire new approaches to global governance?
The mentality of more is part of the cause of this change in the climate. And then you get to the non-doing, right? The non-action, which is not doing nothing, but it's like a pulling back from excess or from trying to have complete control. And so you can think about that in terms of international relations. You could think about that in terms of lots of different aspects of society. There's also the idea of softness and weakness and non-action and how to navigate conflict and how to avoid conflict. The Tao Te Ching is generally trying to teach us how to avoid conflict.
Have you personally practiced Taoist ideas in real life?
I think that after 30 years, I could not avoid absorbing some of the ideas. And obviously, my original inspiration was curiosity about these ideas and how they would affect me, right? It started out as a personal journey. What sort of life do I want to live? How do you engage with other people? Do you try to bulldoze them? Or do you try to have this sort of sensitivity to their perspective, to their situation, and see if you can have a give and a take, not just always pushing forward, always trying to have my ideas right. We always have to do it my way, which is not what the Tao Te Ching suggests. It very directly says, don't do that. Though it's, I think, referring especially to people who have power. That when you have power, you need to be more sensitive to how you use power and the decisions you make and how they influence other people. And so this kind of sensitivity to how we interact.
What role do you think traditional Chinese wisdom may foster cross-cultural understanding in today's world?
I think that the Chinese wisdom, some of it is very profound, and the nature of us in the universe and how to create a perfect society, but some of it just influences everyday life. And to understand the ways of thinking and behaving, it's very meaningful and I think fundamental to, if you want to understand a society. Now that China has become much more developed in the modern age, especially in the 21st century, and has a more prominent role in the world as a whole, it's much more important for people to understand Chinese society, how Chinese people think and how they live and behave. And so understanding this ancient wisdom is part of that effort to understand and engage and create a positive way of living together.
For the Latin version, there's an oldest preserved translation of the book, but it was just published. What do you think is the significance of its release?
I think there are at least two important significances. The first is for scholars and people who want to research the encounter between Chinese culture or Chinese philosophy and European culture or European philosophy. Because this is the first time that a European very seriously studied this important Chinese classic, the Tao Te Ching, and then translated. And the translation is not just a translation. The translator first translates each line of the Chinese into Latin, but then they will have a commentary on each line, which is actually what He Shanggong did in Han Dynasty China. You have one line, Dao ke Dao. What does that mean? Then he'll have an explanation. And the Latin translator did the same thing. Dao ke Dao fei zheng Dao will be translated into Latin, but then it will be explained. In this book, which I published in 2022, it's a list. There are 2,052 different translations listed in the book in 97 languages. So from this Latin translation, from the beginning of this process, 300 years later, we have thousands of translations. And so symbolically, this translation is the beginning of a unique phenomenon in history, right? Because the Tao Te Ching and the number of translations that have been produced of this one book is quite unusual.